as many people as we can to just do the setup, and we're hoping to eventually hardwire it into the place where you just come and flip a switch. It's always the hope. But they keep changing all the technology, so it makes it more and more impossible to do. Okay, so welcome everyone. We are going to do the opening Dharma verse, or the Dharma opening verse, which for those of you who are not familiar with it, if you need a little white pamphlet, you can avail yourselves of one. It's very simple, so you don't actually need it probably. And then we have some things to talk about. So Gyoji, if you will begin, 3 bells and a stop. The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. So Abhi, I'll ask you, since you're from India, how long is a kalpa? We don't know. A long time. So those of you online, we are following CDC guidelines, so we're not fully masked up. Tsuki, it looks like we can't see any of the audience, so I think you could, well, you're going to switch, that's right. Okay, never mind. We're going to try a 2-camera approach today. Please enjoy your tea. You might want to let it cool down a little bit. If you hold the teacup by the top and bottom rim like that, you won't burn your fingers. And usually, traditionally, we hold it with 2 hands. Don't ask me why. Probably so we don't drop it. So I wanted to say a little bit about protocols today. As we get back to in-person practice, the protocols become a little more important so we don't step on each other's toes. And we enter and exit the zendo quietly. You can enter on any half hour. If people are walking, join them walking or wait until they've been seated so you don't sit on somebody's seat. Gyoji here has been Ino for many years. Suki took over as Ino during the COVID period. The Ino is responsible for the layout and cleanliness, etc., of the zendo. Many people who have come here said they think this is marvelous. They don't have this at home. We're very fortunate to have this kind of a facility, even as old as it is. Part of the protocols is formality versus informality. Those of you who've been here for some time know that I show up in an outfit like Gyoji is wearing often, just sumie or work clothes, and rakusu. This is called a rakusu. It's a certificate. Other places you go, the head priest may always put on the big okesa robe, the blanket-like robe. I don't do that for a couple of reasons. It's hot. The robes are sort of the worst part of the whole deal. But we do it out of respect for the tradition. But we don't want to overdo the formality to the point that we seem to be sending the message that unless you get an outfit too, you can't be a Roshi, right? You could be a cowboy too if you get an outfit, right? So if you wear it all the time, you're kind of sending that signal. And Brad Warner, interestingly, when he was here, he's been here a few times, and he was in like corduroy jeans or something and a plaid shirt, and he throws his okesa on over that. He's walking around with his okesa. So we don't want to overdo the informality either, but the formality, we want to show enough respect for tradition. And there are reasons for all of this. Once you get into it, you begin to find out what they were thinking back in those days, right? Not important to go into now. But if people come in late, if they're noisy, if they, I came in late this morning. I was some minutes after 9 o'clock that I got here, and I tended to be early. As we become more in person, it's more and more important that we lead by example. But I was working this morning, my excuse is I was working on the presentation, and I tried very hard to get a little handout done on all the programs that I offer as Abbott, but I couldn't quite pull it all together, and then the printer was out of ink, and all that kind of the usual thing. What would Dogen have done? So please practice patience with each other, forgiveness, patience. If you are very experienced and you come and you see people in our affiliates doing weird things, give them a break. You know, they're in training. Any lack of proper training is my fault. So if you criticize anybody, you're criticizing me, and that's fine. I can take the heat. But please never criticize anyone in front of others. Take them aside if you have a suggestion. Don't ever go to another Zen center and tell them the right way to do it. And this is the way Elliston Roshi says to do it. Don't ever do that. So anyway, I think it made my point. I want to read to you a poem my wife sent to me. She found online, and I've sent it to a few people. You may have gotten it in the email. It's My Brain and Heart Divorced by John Rodell. See, is there some sort of signal here? But I looked him up, and he's like a comic, stand-up comic and a writer, and he's not from what I can tell, he's not a Zen guy, but this really captures, I think, the essence of Zazen in a very funny way. My brain and heart divorced a decade ago over who was to blame about how big of a mess I have become. Eventually, they couldn't be in the same room with each other. Now my head and heart share custody of me. I stay with my brain during the week, and my heart gets me on weekends. They never speak to one another. Instead, they give me the same note to pass to each other every week. And their notes they send to one another always say the same thing: this is all your fault. On Sundays, my heart complains about how my head has let me down in the past. And on Wednesday, my head lists all the times my heart has screwed things up for me in the future. They blame each other for the state of my life. There's been a lot of yelling and crying. So lately, I've been spending a lot of time with my gut, who serves as my unofficial therapist. Most nights, I sneak out of the window in my rib cage and slide down my spine and collapse on my gut's plush leather chair that's always open for me. And I just sit until the sun comes up. Last evening, my gut asked me if I was having a hard time being caught between my heart and my head. I nodded. I said I didn't know if I could live with either of them anymore. Quote, my heart is always sad about something that happened yesterday, while my head is always worried about something that may happen tomorrow, I lamented. My gut squeezed my hand. Quote, I just can't live with my mistakes of the past or my anxiety about the future, I sighed. My gut smiled and said, in that case, you should go stay with your lungs for a while. I was confused. The look on my face gave it away. If you are exhausted about your heart's obsession with the fixed past and your mind's focus on the uncertain future, your lungs are the perfect place for you. There is no yesterday in your lungs. There is no tomorrow there either. There is only now. There is only inhale. There's only exhale. There's only this moment. There's only breath. And in that breath, you can rest while your heart and head work their relationship out. This morning, while my brain was busy reading tea leaves and while my heart was staring at old photographs, I packed a little bag and walked to the door of my lungs. Before I could even knock, she opened the door with a smile, and as a gust of air embraced me, she said, what took you so long? I think that's great. Yeah, I think I'll post this on the wall later, but you can take that one. So I wanted to talk this morning about measuring meditation, in particular Zazen. And then I have some announcements to make about the Abbott's retreat coming up that Gyoji and I are collaborating on in October, and a little bit about applying measurement to Zen retreats. And Zen practice on a larger time scale. Okay, so this first bit is about just when you're sitting in Zazen. So this came up in Dokusan, and one of the things I do is offer online Dokusan, as some of you know. And I start off by saying Dokusan is a two-way street. One of the most surprising and rewarding aspects of offering online Dharma dialogue, or Dokusan, is that the dialogue is synergistic. Because two people come together with the common intention of clarifying the great matter, capitals, a third new thing comes out that is not present in either of the two separately. The conversation is often as or more clarifying for the designated teacher as it is for the identified student. This is in the context of Matsuoka's frequent comment that we teach each other Buddhism. One of the more startling clarifications that has emerged recently from conversations with several online regulars has to do with the measurable dimensions of Zen's meditation method, Zazen, and its effects, again in the context of the immeasurables, capital I, of Zen Buddhism, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. When we consider those aspects of practice that lend themselves to measurement, we get a fairly succinct list. Duration. How long a period of time we sit each session, e.g. half an hour to an hour. How many periods we sit in the session, e.g. one or more periods all day long in extended retreat, with intervals of walking. And by the way, I bring this up in the original Frontier as the first, in the chapter on damn your lousy excuses, as the first reason everybody has they can't do Zazen. I don't have time. And so I have a little try this for each of those excuses. Then secondly, frequency. How often we sit in a larger time frame, e.g. once a day, every day, or so many days of the week. How many group sessions per month? How many retreats per year? Frequency. Duration, frequency. Regularity. How regular our program of meditation is, e.g. at the same time of day, every day or certain days of the week, attending Zen Center every Sunday or certain daily sessions, the regularity, duration, frequency, regularity, consistency. Similar to regularity, but attempting to avoid variations in our schedule over time, trying to be consistent. So duration, frequency, regularity, consistency. And finally, intensity. The level of effort we employ each time we sit, whatever the other measurable dimensions we employ. Okay, so duration, frequency, regularity, consistency, intensity. There are probably more, but these will suffice for the sake of the thesis of this essay, or for the sake of argument if you want to argue. The main point is that the measurables are less important than Matsuoka Roshi's repeat admonition to never give up. In good times or bad, however long or short a time we sit, each time, whatever the frequency, regularity, and consistency of our pattern, we should simply return to the cushion and just sit. The intensity with which we sit is probably the most important of the measurables, being more qualitative than quantitative in nature. So if I had to choose, I would put intensity with maybe duration, maybe. Intensity and duration. Because the truth is, I think, as you sit, the more you sit, the more you kind of want to sit, and the easier it becomes. You get better at it, and so on. But the intensity knob is the one you want to look for. Turn up the intensity knob, so that when you sit, you're not doing anything else. That's what we mean by just sit. And we find it's impossible, of course, in the beginning. Monkey mind going crazy. So following Master Dogen's admonition to make the body sit rather than attempt to make the mind behave, his ox and cart analogy, we can see that Zazen is taking the easy way out. It is easier to make the body sit than to make the mind behave. The ox is tethered to the cart just as much as the cart is tethered to the ox. Mind and body cannot separate. So if we make the body sit, the mind eventually has to follow. Okay, so that's my brief on measuring meditation. And it comes up because we often get a lot of questions about that. And, people say, I know I need to sit more. Going to Doka-san, I need to sit more, I know that. I say, well, when can you sit more? You can't sit more in the past, it's too late. You can't sit more in the future, you can plan to, it doesn't mean you're going to. So the only time you can sit more is when you're sitting. That's what I mean by qualitative. So, as I said, that turns out to be impossible. But what I learned, Matsuoka Roshi never really had long retreats in Halsted Street in Chicago. It was only after Kongo Roshi took over and moved as far as I know, they may have had some off-campus retreats. I just didn't know about them or didn't attend. And Kongo moved the center to Evanston, just north of Chicago, when they sold the building. And he had a home with a large screened-in porch. And so they started sitting retreats there. And Matsuoka would attend those retreats. But he never made a big emphasis or big point of it. And just like all the more sophisticated, complicated protocols, he knew we would figure this all out. He knew we'd do the research and we'd be exposed to other people. So he gave us the basics. He taught us the basics. But I found when I started exploring sort of legitimizing, I started to say legalizing, legitimizing our credentials. And there's an association, Soto Zen Buddhist Association. I'm a little bit like Master Groucho on this, Wouldn't belong to a club that would have me as a member. But I think they're trying hard. They're doing a good job of trying to manage a bad situation. Ben Connolly is now the new president. He will be speaking with us this coming year. And so I'm encouraged by that. I like Ben a lot. But anyway, when I had to, the questionnaire, the forms you fill out to become a member say, does this person lead retreats? I said, well, I've never led a retreat, and we were here already by that time in this building. So I said that our zendo this was a solid wall with a couple of doors in it. This was our zendo. Where you're sitting now was our zendo. We didn't have this part of the building. A cleaning company had it. So it was very tight, very compact. But we decided, maybe it was shortly after we moved into that we started doing these retreats. It was somewhere around 2006, 2007. So then I went on Ongo 90 days in Austin that year. So this was all part of jumping through the hoops to get formal recognition from the larger community. Matsuoka's recognition is enough for me and enough for anybody in our lineage. But for the sake of my students, so that their credentials cannot be questioned, I went through these processes. With Barbara Cohn of the Suzuki lineage, with Okamura Roshi of the Kodo Sawaki Uchiyama lineage, and he did my formal ceremony. His credentials are unquestionable, so now mine should be, although anybody's free to question them if you like. And hopefully that will have a halo effect on our next generation of practitioners. So the SEBA, the first pamphlet was establishing Soto Zen priests in the West. The first conference I went to, I objected to it right away, and I said, I don't think that's what we're doing. I think we're establishing Zen practice in the West. It may or may not include priests. I'm not sure. But Matsuoka Roshi said Zen would find its rebirth in America, and it would be lay practice. So that's kind of the thrust of our lineage and our community is lay practice. We're the 7-Eleven model. We'd rather have a sitting group on every corner than have a big monastery somewhere like a Walmart that you have to drive a long way to. So I'll get into the location strategy in the retreat piece of this. So I began to realize by doing these long retreats, we did 10 that first year that I decided to try them, and by the end of the year we had a good 15, 20 people maybe show up at the last retreat. So, proof of concept, we could do it, I could do it, and people were interested in it. So since then we've been doing retreats. The Abbott's Retreat coming up this the weekend of October 7th to 9th, and again, I'll post this on the wall out here. Goji has been doing Just Sit Saturday for how many years now? About 5 years. Yeah, and that's 9 to 4 on second Saturday, very consistently in person until COVID hit, and then you were doing them online.
Yeah, for a little bit we didn't do anything, and then finally, like everybody else, gradually levitated toward Zoom, so we were able to.
Yep.
Yeah.
You levitated. Gravitated. Yeah.
My wife gets me stuff like this.
I'm levitating. Actually, we are levitating, by the way, physically.
And so I think last month was the first, or this month was the first month that we actually did it
In person.
in person.
And what, you had attendance of 8 or 9? I
We
can't
had
remember.
6 consistently here and 1 or 2 people online.
Okay, so we're doing a hybrid. Last Sunday, I think I counted 14, 15 people online, and then we had 10 people in the room. And you can see we're going to continue with the hybrid, but we're hoping that more and more people can attend these retreats. So I've published a paper and I've sent it to a few people. I plan to send it to all of our practice leaders, and it's called Designing Zen Retreats.
Just kind of, what you read to start with, the neat thing about Just This Saturday or a retreat is that, and Teshin kind of pointed this out too,
Teshin is our practice leader in Nova Scotia.
is that, many
Need the mic.
times.
Need the mic. Close to your mouth.
Okay. So the neat thing about doing a retreat, and Teshin pointed out, it's kind of like sometimes we're like a turntable, everything, you got everything going, and it takes a little bit to settle down. Sometimes it may take 2 25-minute sits, even 3 25-minute sits
Yep.
to really settle down into the sit. And so it's just a different experience totally than if you just come and just sit once in the morning or something like that.
Yep.
And so once you experience, then again, you can read all the books about sin you want, but until you actually practice it or do it, you just don't really get it. So,
Andy, would you bring me a napkin when you're? So the 90-minute period we have here each Sunday morning, I hesitate to even offer Dokusan, but that's another reason people come. We can do Dokusan online as well, but the reason is 90 minutes is not very long, really. I mean, once you get into meditating, it's sort of like, is it really worth the trip, And if the commute, if you drive, especially in an urban setting like Atlanta, the drive can be the majority of the experience. And so that's why we have so designing Zen retreats, the same kinds of considerations. I'm sorry if I'm cutting off any dialogue on the first part, but I think it was simple enough that we can remember it, right? So we'll have a Q&A. Thank you. Just a little warm up. Thank you. So the same kind of considerations that we perhaps unconsciously apply to our personal practice and pattern of Zazen are appropriate when looking at the social level of community practice, particularly the design of retreats. Structuring retreats. When we attend retreat, a curious thing happens. We voluntarily surrender the control of our schedule to others. The repeat mantra at Zen retreats is follow the schedule. This appears at first blush to be a somewhat demeaning demand, and I'm not going to read all this. Don't worry. Okay. A demeaning demand, but turns out to be a source of liberation. With someone else timing the sessions, we are relieved of the burden of keeping track of time ourselves. I've mentioned this before, but if I see somebody looking at their watch, I'll go ask to borrow it. People are going like this. Thus, we are able to set aside clock time for the nonce and enter into real time. Someone said that in Zazen, the barriers of time and space drop away. Of course, these are self-imposed barriers from the beginning. Or you could say that they're imposed upon us as cultural memes by parents, peers, the larger social milieu in which we find ourselves, accumulating as the weight of custom, as debated by many philosophers. So a lot of what we walk into the Zendo with is not our own baggage. It's coming from the culture, it's coming from the family, it's coming from so forth. Not your fault. We still have to dump it, we still have to get rid of the baggage. So constraints and freedom, when we enter into Zen practice, we hope to become free from the shackles of this kind of thinking, which has so penetrated our worldview as to be unconscious. So while we use the norms of society in structuring Zen retreats, we all wear clothes, for instance, we recognize that such aspects as timing of sessions intentionally employ a quasi-militaristic approach to troop cohesion in order to free the individual from all constraints, a kind of jujitsu of the mind, or an unavoidable catch-22 of group movement. The forms of protocols we have inherited from the ancients are often referred to as the lattice on which the vine of practice grows. The former is dependably regular in geometry, while the latter may be wildly organic in its patterning. The one reinforces the other, more like a chart of the chord progression upon which a jazz ensemble improvises, than a classic piece of notation which the orchestra attempts to replicate down to the expression of each note. So that's the way I encourage you to take the so-called forms, or what I call protocols. And again, when you go someplace else, don't tell them they're doing it wrong. just do it the way they do it. So optimizing time. When organizing retreats for optimal effect, such asocial constraints as observing silence are traditionally brought to bear. Whether these should be imposed or merely encouraged is a matter of skillful means. In Zen, self-discipline is generally recognized as the only true discipline, the original aspects being right speech, action, and livelihood, as articulated in the Noble Eightfold Path. Speech in most retreats cannot be absolutely prohibited, so techniques such as orientation sessions, passing written notes, and taking someone aside and whispering are employed to minimize the distraction of the human voice and needless chatter. This is out of respect for the experience of others. Minimizing distance, so that was, so far it's structuring retreats, constraints and freedom, optimizing time, minimizing distance. One of the factors influencing retreats in modern times is the necessity of traveling to the location. The most common complaint or excuse that you hear is that it is too far, it takes too long to get there, especially in modern traffic, and that it is not worth it. In the brick and mortar form of retail merchandising, this has been a known issue and is dealt with by what is referred to as location strategy. Firms offering this service often develop an ideal location based on several factors, such as size of the lot, accessibility, parking, nearness to main arteries of expressways, etc. This model expressed as a bar chart is then used to measure how close a proposed location matches the ideal, and within a percentage margin, the retailer chooses or rejects the location under question. Location strategy, there are two general location strategies at opposite ends of the spectrum. One is called a convenience location, the other a destination. 7-Eleven and Walmart are two examples of these types of shopping experiences. In determining the market for a location, distance from the site is a primary consideration, or how accessible the site is on the commute for purposes of selling gasoline and other convenience items. So destination versus convenience. The STO strategy of fostering startups, sitting groups, and affiliate centers is based on the convenience model, if somewhat moderated from a one on every corner stance. If a person lives or moves too far away from an existing center, if they meet certain minimal qualifications, we are willing and able to enable them to establish their own sitting group. If their members develop the need for a more robust and extensive program, we have our more established centers and programs to meet those needs. Distance from the site largely determines whether the program offered is a convenience or destination. In location strategy, this is known as the draw or reach of that operation that an operation has. The draw that a Zen center has may depend upon the competition, the presence or lack of other options within a certain travel distance, and the quality of the programs and events offered. Generally, the proportionality between the distance traveled and the quality and duration of the event offered determines the decision to participate or not. So, menu of options. As a best practice, we should develop our programs around these practical real-world parameters. To establish the draw of a given center in the network, we should set up a menu of options that serve both the convenience function of near neighborhood practice, along with the destination function of longer reach to more distant members. In general, the daily and weekly programs of meditation would appeal to the local membership, while the longer retreats will attract audience attendance from a larger radius. A general rule of thumb seems to be that when the commute begins to exceed an hour, especially in heavy traffic, attendance falls off proportionally to the distance traveled. So a diameter of 30 miles or so from an urban center would begin to represent the maximum draw for regular events of relatively short duration, such as our Sunday morning session at ASCC, which is 3 hours in duration from 9 to noon. The expected draw for morning meditation, which is 1 hour from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., would be 20 minutes, or a factor of roughly 3 to 1. Extrapolating from this proportionality, if we hold an event that lasts 12 hours, say from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. as a day-long retreat, Zazenkai, we might expect the draw to expand to a 4-hour round-trip drive. The 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. just sit Saturday, then it would max out at about the same distance. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, getting into logistics and accommodations. Here's the map I printed when my printer was running out of color. This yellow circle should be red. That shows Atlanta and just touching Jacksonville. So it's roughly a 300-mile, 5-hour radius. This shows Watershed, Brian's place at the lake. And you can see we're 2.5 hours apart, roughly, based on this scale. So this is the radius of his draw, which touches Raleigh, which is where Randy is. So on this, you could base your strategy. Look at all the towns and so forth in Georgia and surrounding states that are in our radius. And so that would be where you would, if you were doing a mailing, that would be where you would target your mailing and so forth. So anyway, I want to revisit then measuring meditation. And if you'd like to talk about the larger context of it, how do we structure long draw retreats, destination events in that same context, that's fine with me. But let me know how you feel about this idea of looking at your own meditation in terms of duration, frequency, regularity, consistency, intensity, and perhaps which are where your head is fixed right now. Do you think you need more regularity? You need more consistency? You need more duration? You need... Lenny, microphone.
Can you clarify the difference between frequency and consistency?
Yeah, frequency is very much how often you sit. Like I sit every day. Well, I can outsit you. I sit all day, every day. You know, I sit every hour. Macho Zen. So consistency would be that even though you don't sit every day, you may not even sit every week. When you sit, it's very consistent with the way you always sit. You're not playing around with, you've gotten your posture down, you're not experimenting with posture anymore. Or if experimenting with posture is part of your consistency, then every time you sit, you experiment with your equipment, you rearrange your cushions, you try something, see if it's better.
So sameness within the routine itself.
Yeah, sameness and difference. You can be consistently inconsistent, which a lot of people are. But I think regularity and consistency are closer together but they're slightly different. And regularity is usually associated with time, other than when you get to my age and it's associated with something else. A sense of humor is required. Okay. So at this point, let's, Suki, please take over and facilitate.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody in the Zendo or on Zoom want to make a statement or question about anything we can discuss this far, please raise your hand or make some indication, and I'll call upon you. You have a question from Adam? Can we pass the microphone?
I'm interested to know more about intensity. I think if you grow accustomed to sitting for long periods over an extended period of time with that frequency, the degree of intensity necessarily goes down.
If you're sitting for long periods?
Yeah, like on a maybe daily basis, if you sit an hour, then as Robert mentioned earlier, maybe it takes 90 minutes to even really start to settle into.
Half an hour, I'm just warming up.
Right,
you know.
same. So how do you?
I don't think it goes down. I think what it does is a crescendo.
Okay.
I think there's a crescendo form. I think it increases to a peak, and then there's a fall off.
Mm.
And that crescendo can happen every minute, it can happen every hour, it can happen every day, and it can happen through the week where you hit hump day, Wednesday, something, and you may hit your crescendo on Thursday or Friday. Or the way we've designed our retreat schedule, the wraparound retreat that Goji and I put together, the Abbott's retreat starts Friday evening with arrival orientation, so forth. But if people can't get here Friday evening, they can come Saturday morning. Then we start early Saturday morning, and we go up till 9 when Gyoji's just at Saturday goes from 9 to 4. Then we continue and go till 9 o'clock at night and do the more monastic closure with the Tisarana. Then next morning, we're up again early for breakfast. We start again early. So all we're doing is sort of filling in the blanks of the weekend, wrapping around what Gyoji's already doing. And we go till noon on Sunday. So if any affiliate wants to have a longer retreat to justify the 5 hours drive from Jacksonville, for instance, then we'd say 3 times that we'll offer 3 days. And we'll just back up the start date from Friday to Thursday to Wednesday or Tuesday or even Monday evening and fill that in. And that's where we get to the week-long retreats that John Hinman was talking about last week that we did up at Lake Allatoona. And once you're in one of those, the window of opportunity is so vast compared to sitting here for an hour and a half. You still fall in the same monkey mind business of thinking, what am I going to be doing this afternoon? Well, guess what? This is what you're going to be doing this afternoon. What am I going to be doing tomorrow? This is what you're going to be doing tomorrow. And so that question just sort of fades into irrelevance. And that's when the intensity, I think, comes in, because you realize it's not that you don't have options, you can leave, but you volunteered to not have any options. And so it opens up that window of opportunity for you to go deeper and broader into your practice experience.
And could you speak a little more about like the qualitative nature of the intensity?
The qualitative and the quantitative, I came to the conclusion that they cannot be separated in Zen. That it isn't a one-to-one correlation. It isn't like the longer you sit, the more quality your experience was. It's not like that. In my memory, the ones that I wanted to run screaming out of the place and go take care of some personal situation that I was screwing up, those were the best. And if I had done that, I would have screwed it up more, right? So in retrospect, you begin to see the arc of your practice over time. You can't see it immediately. So it's best to just give that up. Give it up, just sit, just put your whole self into sitting, since I said. So the qualitative and the quantitative cannot truly be separated, but they have a synergistic or collaborative effect on each other. They're complementary. They're definitely turning points in your practice over the long view, year after year, decade after decade. And there are during the days of a retreat and the hours of a day. Dogen was quoted as saying he was talking about the best time to do Zazen. And in those days, they had 12 hours in the day, 2-hour watches, around the clock. So he would talk about this 2-hour segment, how that was such a great time to do Zazen. And he would talk about another one. And he would talk about another. Pretty soon you got the point. They're all good. I don't see any hands.
Anyone on that, Jonathan? Go right ahead.
Did you call on me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, Joe, thank you. This is very helpful.
Good.
Would you, given that we're spending, most of us, so much time off the cushion, no matter how much time we're sitting on the cushion, would you consider talking a little bit about perhaps mindset, intention, expectations as I transition off the cushion? Is there something there that I might intentionally try to hold into awareness as I move forward?
That's a very good point. And Dogen actually mentions that in his Fukan Zazenge's Principles of Seated Meditation, he says, when you rise for Kinhin, do not do so violently, abruptly, smooth transition from sitting to standing. And so what he's indicating, and Kinhin, walking meditation, is understood to be the first transition from seated meditation or relative stillness into relative motion. Mokurai, the ancient term, means stillness in motion, motion in stillness. So you begin to experience the relative difference, again, the sameness and difference principle, from the relative stillness of sitting, getting up, but keeping everything in place, so to speak, keeping your attention in Tanden. Then you sort of follow the Tanden around the room. You start feeling the relative motion of you walking through the room and the room flowing through your awareness. And if you stop, it stops. If you lean to the left, it goes to the right. So you begin to sense this sort of zero-sum game that actually there's no motion here, because for every movement I make, it makes the opposite motion. So those kinds of subtle awarenesses Dogen called the subtle mind of nirvana, or the fine mind of nirvana, a little like Alice in Wonderland. Bite of this cookie, you get big, small. Bite of the other cookie, you get small. But we don't really know how big we are. We only have relative measures of that. I'm 6'2", eyes of blue, and so forth. But when you're sitting, it turns into, as Sensei said, like a mountain. It's as if you're looking down from the top of a mountain. And the floor in the Zendo could be thousands and thousands of feet below. When you're walking around, it's like being in a glider or an airplane. And once you start losing that sense of ordinary scale or something of that nature. So everything starts to get disoriented. And if that starts happening to you, it's working. So when we make the transition from the sitting to just into the walking meditation, that's the first step towards making that transition out into the parking lot and into our car and back on the expressway. If you draw a line there, you're drawing that line. There's no such line. It's a dashed or dotted line at best. And so the halo effect of our practice on the cushion begins to carry over into our daily life. We don't have to force that issue. If you try to apply Zen to your daily life, you'll probably screw it up. So you want to just apply yourself to Zen, especially, primarily through meditation practice. And don't worry, it will apply itself to your life. Does that make sense, John?
Yes. Yes.
One thing you can do to kind of experience this, next time you are sitting and then you get in the car and go driving, and when you're sitting at a red light, not when it's green and not when you're driving, when you're sitting at a red light, let yourself go into the meditation posture in fixed gaze. You'll start noticing some weird things, like when a car passes in front of you, it's very, very small over here. And it gets very, very large in the middle. And then it gets very, very small as it goes away. So your monkey mind, your Photoshop, function is not filling it in and keeping it constant for you. You see what it really looks like and what's really happening. It's like a visual Doppler effect. But when a light turns green, stop doing that. It's dangerous. You can also, the halo effect, the posture, the breath, the motor muscle memory will all start taking over when you're under stressful situations at work, at home, or wherever. You'll find your body automatically, naturally starts sitting up straighter. You start breathing deeper. This is trust in mind. We want to trust this process to be natural. It's the natural posture, the natural breath, natural state of mind. And so in overtly stressful situations, some of us work in extremely stressful situations here, you'll find it kicking in automatically.
We have a question or comment from Michael Mazindo.
So when I heard the topic was about measuring, I was very curious because whenever I enter into meditation, I always try to do it without a gaining mind. And that's been kind of the
Without what?
a gaining mind.
A gaining mind, yes.
And
I
that's
thought you
always,
said a ding in mind.
No.
I thought you meant like a ding at the end.
and that's always been like that foundational principle for me.
Yep.
And I try to detach from the idea of I need to sit more, or I need to breathe differently, or I need to, you know, and have that as the foundational motivation.
Right.
But with that being said, I still do feel like I'm not as, I guess, integrated into the Sangha as I'd like to be. And I still want to transition from treating the Zendo like a friend's house, visiting a friend's house, to more like visiting your home.
Right.
And I was curious if you could speak on that point in which you were sitting, and because sometimes I get the motivation to sit more, or I get the motivation to come more often, but then it kind of dies out a little bit because
Sure.
you may not act on it, or it's just there for a second.
Well, you asked two basic questions there. One was the gaining mind,
Mhm.
and one was the community participation in Sangha practice. And they can influence each other. I mean, a lot of people come to the community, join the Sangha for the wrong reasons. They're, you know, they're trying to plug in things that they think are missing from their life at home. But so take the last one first. The exercise we'll do today, as Gyoji announced, we do a hard stop at 1:45. What time is it?
It's close, 11:40.
Okay, about 5 minutes. We're going to stop and clean. And so that's one of the functions by which you integrate yourself into the community. You begin to take care of the practice place. And so you do begin to have ownership of it, and you begin to feel authorship and ownership. So that those kinds of activities can help overcome that seeming barrier. On the other hand, you don't want to get overly involved in the community to the point of it becoming a substitute for your personal meditation. That can happen. But back to the gaining mind, there's a design thinking aspect. In design and art training, we think of media as either subtractive or additive. Very simple concept. If you put clay on a bus to build on an armature to build a bus, that's additive, right? If you chip the stone away like Rodin to reveal the sculpture, that's subtractive. So if you look at meditation as an immersive practice in a creative activity, the medium in which you're immersing yourself is not stone or clay or paint or photography or whatever, it's your own consciousness. But the process is clearly, from my perspective, subtractive. There is nothing added. You can say, I gained some insight, but you know, that's just semantics. So what we're doing is we're divesting ourselves of our own baggage. And as I said earlier, a lot of the baggage you bring in here is not yours. It's dumped on you by your parents and by your culture and peers and so forth. So mostly why it takes so long is we have so much ignorance, we have so much confusion, it just takes a long time to get to the bottom of all that crap. And the monkey is there to try to keep you from getting there. So the gaining idea turns into being a way to, one of the pieces of baggage we have to let go of. And when we get to the bottom of that pile, emptiness, we find coming down from the mountaintop, our relationship to community is very different than it was climbing the mountain. So both of those things are complementary and they reinforce each other. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much, Roger.
Subtraction.
I see somebody named Zoom user, but it looks like Chishiki. Go ahead, Chishiki.
Oh, that's definitely him. See that car he's wearing?
Breaking up for us.
I'm always in the car. Can you guys hear me?
Not really.
What did he say?
Can you all hear me?
That's better. That's better.
Are you, am I? Well, maybe you guys should defer to somebody else who's asking a question if you can't hear me.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to defer.
Can you pull forward about 6 feet?
All right, so we will defer. Does anybody else?
Never mind. Is it better? Okay. Well, I'll try.
That's good. That's
I
good.
just wanted to ask one more question. I know we don't have a lot of time, but to say I really, really enjoy.
Well, I was trying to answer your question the way you asked it.
I'm so sorry, Chi. If we can't make out the full sentence, if you're able to put it in the chat, I'll relay.
Put it in the chat.
Is it? Okay. Straight.
Any last remaining comments or questions besides Chi's?
Just
before-
anybody who wants to follow up, please contact me by email. And please save the date, Abbott's Retreat, second weekend, October 7th through 9th. And that will be a hybrid version of that. And if you want any of this information, Chishiki, I think I sent the whole package to you on the retreats, on these designing Zen retreats, so we can discuss it separately. Mike, what's going to be covered in the retreat? Gyoji is reminding me that these are training retreats. And we have 3 or 4 or 5, 6, including Tenzo, we have different training modules. And different people are interested in different ones. Some people volunteer to cook and so forth. So what we do is we take each retreat and we take one of these modules. The first one in October is going to be how to lead a Zen meditation session, how to give instructions, how to time the session. So that's going to be the focus in October. In November, we'll move on to how to lead a Dharma dialogue. So these are designed to help train our practice leaders, but they're germane to anybody who's practicing Zen. Because if you've ever had to teach anything, you had to figure out what it really was, or you couldn't teach it. And so we're doing the Socratic method, kind of a turnaround to where you will be taught how these things are done, and you will be given chances to do it and to repeat it. There's only so much time in it's about a 24-hour schedule, Friday and Saturday and Sunday. But there will be time in there for you to try some of these things. Later on, we'll teach posture correction, things of that nature. And so on Sunday, you could actually go around and, practice what you've been taught. So that's the idea of these retreats. Right now, they're every other month. They're going to be October and December. Next year, if there's enough interest and attendance, we may go to every month. Thank you, Gyoji. So let's do the closing verse, and we can do 10 minutes of cleaning anyway. 3 and a stop, and 2 on the last line. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Karma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. Vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. Vow to enter them. Buddha way is unsurpassable. Vow to realize it. Thank you for your attention and listening. Keep the Dana coming in so we can stay open.
Kasha, everybody, thank you for your patience today. We'll see y'all next week.